Hi, welcome back to the beginning of Chapter 6 in Follet, the video book. Um, Today, there's nothing that you probably couldn't share with your grandmother. Um, no, I promise there's just a little bit of teasing, a little bit of pie, and a little hint of something to come, but nothing that you couldn't happily uh, enjoy with someone you love. Okay, here we go. If you're ready, I'm ready. Follet woke up, arms and legs entwined with Beebe's. He moved his head and found Beebe's delicious mouth and kissed her as softly as he could. As his lips barely touched hers, he watched her closed eyelids. A flutter under her lids, her lips responded to his with the slightest pressure. She moved her head, she opened her eyes, and he felt her smile before he fell into the deep, deep brown depths of her eyes. They woke up slowly together and made love again, slowly together. Later, and still later, and then much later, Beebe crawled to the edge of the bed, swung her legs over to the side of the mattress, and stood up. Follet reached for her again, but his hand fell, missing her, his fingers softly grazing her ass. She turned to him, letting him see all of the places of her body where she had led him last night, smiled and said, "I'll be taking a shower," before turning away and letting him enjoy watching her hips roll as she sauntered to the bathroom. Follet stretched out on the bed, rubbed his eyes, and listened to the splash of water from the shower. Beebe sang the old Disney song in a soft alto. Anything your heart desires will come to you. If your heart is in your dream, no request is too extreme. When you wish upon a star like dreamers do, fate is kind. She brings to those who love the sweet fulfillment of their secret longing, like a bolt out of the blue. And Follet hopped out of the bed to join her. And then later, Beebe finished her ablutions and then finished Follet. She left the shower and grabbed a gigantic white bath sheet, wrapped it around herself, and walked back into the main room of the cabin. Follet left the shower a few minutes after that, grabbed a towel, dried himself, and tied it around his waist. He walked out of the bathroom looking for his jeans, boots, and t-shirt. Beebe was standing next to the bed, combing the tangles out of her wet hair, wearing faded blue cutoffs and a black Dose t-shirt that had seen many washings. She walked over to Follet and melted into his arms. As he held her, he kissed the tip of her nose and said, "Beebe, baby." He laughed. "You know, I've wanted to say that to you since I first met you. I've got to get back on the road." She nodded. "Not before I make you a cup of coffee." Follet sat at the table, going through the tarot deck. It's a replica of a reproduction of a 15th century Italian deck, Solabusca. It's a standard 78-card deck. "Would you like a reading with your coffee?" Beebe said as she walked over to the table carrying 2 steaming pottery mugs. "I've got milk and honey, honey." She giggled. "I've been wanting to say that since I first met you." Follet discovered many years ago in New Orleans that tarot readings for incubi were equivocal, confused the reader, and worst of all, promised the incubus glimpses into possibilities that he should never have. "Thanks, I'll have to skip the reading. I've got to get on the road, but I would love both the milk and honey, please." Beebe smiled, sipped her black coffee, and then rose to get the milk, a spoon, and a ball jar with a honeycomb inside. "I found the comb out back in the crotch of a lightning-struck tree. I know it isn't proper to just break off a piece of the comb and drop it into your coffee, but I won't tell." Follet reached into the jar, broke off a small piece of the comb, and dropped it into his mug. He licked the honey from his fingers, poured in a little milk into the cup, and stirred. "Wonderful," he told her. They sat together at the table, enjoying the quiet and the closeness. Beebe reached for his leg with her foot under the table, running her toes slowly up and down his leg. He reached out to take her hand, just far enough so that their fingers touched. The sunlight filled the little cabin. It was very good. Follet drank the last of his coffee, fishing the last chunk of the honeycomb out of the mug and popping it into his mouth. He stood and Beebe stood with him. They held each other for a few minutes and kissed softly. "Thanks for, well, everything, Beebe." Follet couldn't hide his grin. "Thank you for a wonderful evening, Frank," she said, her bright, boundless eyes holding him as surely as her arms had done. "You know where to find me." Follet left her embrace and walked to his car, opened the door, and slid into the bucket seat. He rolled down the window, turned the ignition, revved the engine, and put her into gear. As he pulled out from the front of her cabin, he stuck his arm out of the window and waved to her. In the rearview mirror, he saw her standing at her door, her arms crossed across her chest, holding herself and smiling. Follet drove down the mountain and headed east, skirted Denver, ignoring the interstates. He had work to do, and he hadn't traveled these roads in a long time. Follet found Highway 36 and headed east, passing the post office in Joe's, Colorado, and a filling station in Adalia before crossing the border into Kansas. He drove on through Atwood, enjoying the gently rolling hills and occasional creek as he drove on. He drove through Oberlin, and just before he saw the city lights for Norton, he smiled at the big sign directing him to Prairie Dog State Park. The country driving was as soothing as a meditation for Follet, but by the time he reached Hiawatha, about 40 miles before the Missouri River, he needed to stretch his legs, fill the car with gas, and get something to eat. At the edge of town, Follet pulled into a gas station, filled the tank, and asked for a place to get some good pie. The cashier grinned and said, "You probably want the pie place, just past the county courthouse on the right." I should have known, Follet thought. Follet drove through the little town. It could have been any one of 1,000 little towns on the Great Plains. He saw a sign for the pie place and parked in front. He walked through the door of the little shop. There were 6 square Formica tables, each with 4 chairs, and a glass-fronted showcase with 4 glass shelves holding a variety of pies. Beside the brunette waitress, there was not another soul in the place. The waitress walked up to where Follet sat, carrying a coffee pot and a cup, and said, "Hi, coffee?" Follet noted the waitress's name tag, Jenna, smiled, nodded, and asked, "What's good?" Jenna smiled and poured the coffee, and Follet took a sip. And Jenna said, "Well, I can't have no affair 'cause it's wrong, and I don't want Earl to kill me. Pie is one of my favorites." Follet almost spit the coffee all over the table. "What?" he asked, laughing. Jenna was clearly enjoying this. "It's just vanilla custard with banana, hold the banana, but it's pretty good." Follet composed himself, chuckled, and said, "I'd love a piece of that, thanks." Jenna went back to get the pie. She returned in a minute with a gorgeous piece of the custard pie on a white plate with a blue border. She watched as Follet cut a bite with the side of his fork, put it in his mouth, and chewed. Just the thing, thanks." "We named it after a pie in that Waitress movie. It seemed like a good idea," Jenna explained. Jenna put the check on the table and left Follet to finish the pie. It was delicious and filled him up. Follet left a tip, got up, and walked over to the counter. "Thanks," he told Jenna. "Is there a good place to stay in Hiawatha?" Jenna looked him up and down. "Well, if you don't need anything fancy, chocolate's on your pillow. There's a Best Rest just down the street on the left. It's clean and cheap, but there's no restaurant nearby." "Thanks," Follet said. "What time do you open for breakfast?" 7 a.m., rain or shine," Jenna replied. "Then I'll see you in the morning, ma'am," Follet promised. "I'd like that," she said. Follet went out to his car, drove down the street, and found Best Rest, just as Jenna had promised. He got a pleasant little knotty pine-paneled room with a bathroom, a TV, a small writing desk, and a 3-door dresser with a mirror and a Gideon Bible in the bottom drawer. Follet tossed his bag toward the closet and flopped down on the bed, falling almost instantly asleep. He woke up with a start and looked at his watch. Midnight. Something was wrong. He felt the calling, but this time it was different. It demanded his attention, as it always did, but just beneath the seductive compulsion he could almost hear a scream.